Welcome everyone. Welcome to the sixth webinar of the Sustainable Cities MOOC. This week in the sixth module, we have looked at issues of basic services and infrastructure provision in a way that is efficient, equitable, and sustainable. Peter Newman will then takes us to the particular case of transport as one of the infrastructure services and how that correlates with the larger climate and energy questions. To say a few words about him, he's a distinguished professor in the School of Humanities, Research and Graduate Studies, Curtin University, Sustainability Policy Institute in Perth. He's the author of 17 books and over 300 papers. In 2014, he was awarded an Order of Australia for his contributions to urban design and sustainable transport. He has worked as a part of the local government as an elected councillor in the state government and advisor to 3 premiers. He has a book, The End of Automobile Dependence, on how cities are moving beyond the car-based planning, and is on the Australian government on the Board of Infrastructure and in the UN on the IPCC as the lead author for transport. So now from me, I would like to hand over to Peter. Peter, please. It's all yours.
Thank you, Gagi, and welcome everybody. So I'm Peter Newman, and I'm sitting in Perth, Australia, at 9:30 in the morning. I hope you're not in the middle of the night, but if you are, you're especially welcome. I have a PowerPoint which I'd like to now switch on, and it's essentially going to show me how to do that. Doesn't seem to be doing it, Gagi. What should I be doing?
Peter, like we discussed, you go onto the screen share.
Yeah, I've done that.
Yes, and now you open the window which has your PowerPoint.
Well, it is open on my desktop, but I can't see my desktop. I'm still seeing you.
Yeah, so you minimize this window and you maximize the window, which has your PowerPoint.
Oh,
okay. That's not going to work.
All right, I will find it. It's there we go. So is that okay?
Yes, yes. I think if you make it full screen, yes, it'll be better for viewers. That's
okay.
Right. Great.
All right.
Perfect.
I will fire away for 15 minutes. Sustainable transport. So, yeah, I write these books. Mostly I have coined the term automobile dependence, which is the problem we have without designing and building cities so that we have to use a car. And we collect data on cities. Just a quick look at this. You can see the American cities in the black with a usage of fuel for transport, which is over the 100,000 mark there. The worst cities, Atlanta, Houston, Denver, going through to the Australian, Canadian, New Zealand cities in the blue there, with some red, which are around half of that. Then you go down half again to European cities. All those green ones are European cities at around 20 or 20,000 or less. Coming through to the cities that are much less in their fuel use. The lowest green one there is Barcelona at about 8. And then you get to the Indian, Chinese, Latin American cities, which are less than 5, and some of them down around 2. So dramatically different amounts of fuel use per capita in these cities. So what causes this? Density is a major factor. You can see that the really dense cities on the left there are all the cities that use cars far less, and the low density cities on the right. So this diagram is a summary of it all. The automobile cities are built around the car. They're the automobile dependent ones. They are very low density. they spread out across the countryside. The transit cities built around trains and trams originally, and still like that, more the European ones, and what we call the walking cities are the very dense ones. So density is important in this whole story. This is an Indian city with the kind of densities that you find everywhere. And in many places in India, China, Bangladesh, where I go to, people are a bit ashamed of this density. Don't be. This is very important. This is how you become sustainable. It is not good to spread a city out across the landscape. You will find massive amounts of car use will develop. So just quickly showing you here that we made a film in Indian cities. It's called Taming Streets. You can get it on YouTube, and it is telling a bit of a story about two places. Firstly, Pune, where we worked on helping pedestrians. See this poor guy trying to cross the street here? Now, dense cities will always have lots of cars on the streets and a lot of motorbikes, as you can see. And they're really trying, for sustainable transport, we're really trying to help this poor guy. The pedestrian, how do we do that? Well, the first thing we did was to work with the community in showing what the problem was. Everybody realizes it. What can you do about the design of streets so that they are more for pedestrians? And we then got a deliberative process where we got consensus very quickly, and we implemented it through the local politicians, and did this in the streets to show how you could make it a far more important street for pedestrians, with a lot of activity on those streets, and where car use was far less. It was very popular, and it does show you can do it in these cities. The second project was about Bangalore, where we looked at the metro, which was being expanded, to see how we could finance it using land development. This was how many cities are now moving, and I'll talk about it a bit later, but also to see what it means about helping the displaced poor. So we had a deliberative process again. We got a successful deliberation process, and we looked at in great detail at the data. What we found was that the metro dramatically increases the value of land around stations. It's a very obvious thing, but we got numbers on it. And it also showed that you could do it around, particularly around certain stations further out from the central business district. So it is a way of making cities in the suburbs. And that's now happening. A lot of building going on around the stations. The important thing is to preserve that density that is still there for many who are of less means, and that is also possible to do through government interventions. So what the context for all of this is the sustainable transport theories, which Gargi mentioned this book, The End of Automobile Dependence, How Cities Are Moving Beyond Car-Based Planning. It's the third book in a series, but it actually shows that car use is beginning to decline. This is American cities, this is Australian cities, going down from about 2004. Now, the causes of this, certainly densities are coming back up again. Cities are coming back in. Travel time benefits are moving now from cars to rail. There is a cultural change. Younger people are using cars less. There is a very important economic factor that the knowledge economy, the new kind of economy, needs face-to-face interactions. And so the overall factor now is that there is a global growth in rail. There are 82 Chinese cities building metros and high-speed rail. Shanghai and Beijing, for example, massive increases in public transport. You can see Beijing down to the right there. Private vehicle usage is actually in decline now in Beijing and Shanghai. 51 Indian cities are building metros. This is a dramatic shift in priorities. And even the Middle Eastern cities are building rail. But across the world, there is a second rail revolution happening. Now, how do you fund it is important. We've put together a little document that tries to show how you can do this with land development. It is an important shift because up until now, rail projects were seen as welfare and had to be government only. There are ways we can now fund it entirely using private developers who want to do the developments that are associated with new rail, so they need to contribute to that. Now, the interesting thing is there's a new technology that's come. It's called a trackless train or a trackless tram. It looks like a tram, doesn't it? This is a new autonomous rail transit. There is no driver in there, but you can have a driver, of course. It is following a track that is painted on the road. So it means you can actually build it very quickly. It looks like a tram because it's got lots of doors that open along the sides. You can carry 300 people in that, 500 if you have 5 of them. And it's electric. So it's got batteries on the roof, no catenaries. This is a major breakthrough in technology, I believe, and it's very much cheaper because it is, in fact, a bus, but it's doing the job of a train. It's not like a BRT, which is, in fact, quite noisy and dirty and difficult to get into any system. This is a lot more attractive. It's quiet, it's efficient, it does 70 kilometres an hour. It recharges at stations. So the stations are very important, and therefore developers can build around it, and the same model applies. You can put money, get money from the developers who want to build around such a technology. I believe this is going to be a major step forward in our cities for the future. It will enable us to get cars out. You could see here that that amount of space with cars can be replaced by 3 buses or 1 light rail. Massive space savings, that's massive money savings, and it's massive greenhouse gas and air pollutant savings as well. So where do we do this? It's important to recognise that the old walking cities in the centre need to be redeveloped as pedestrian areas. We need to build around station areas along the transit cities, but we can build out into the car-based cities now with this new technology. Very important to see that the results are more walkable cities and they have higher GDP. You will actually increase the wealth of the city the more you get people out of cars. That is now happening. So we're decoupling wealth from greenhouse emissions. And around the world, that is now happening. The greenhouse gases are going down and the wealth is continuing to go up. There are places in the world where both oil and coal are rapidly going down. The wealth continues to rise, like Denmark. In Australia, that is beginning to happen. We're a bit behind Europe, the US as well. China is now doing it. It is decoupling energy, coal and oil from wealth. India is continuing to increase, but it is decoupling. So programs that show how coal and oil are not needed can actually decouple. So this is my predictions for the future. This is my last slide. It's showing how GDP can continue to increase. CO2 will go down as renewables based around both the reductions in coal and oil will go. Coal will go first, and then oil, then gas, and we will create the 80% less greenhouse gases whilst making cities that work better. So thank you very much for that. I will now turn that off and come back to the screen so we can talk about these things, and hopefully I will find myself back on again. So turn off the screen share.
Screen share.
How's that?
No, it's still on.
It's still on screening. So
You're screen sharing. Yes, it still shows that you're screen sharing. Yes, there you are.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I think that last slide was just a lot of hope, you know, on how we are going down. Coal is gone, and then there's fuel and gas. But now we'll start taking questions from the viewers. So the first question is from Reggie, and he would like to know, how can we implement sustainable transport when the population capacity has exceeded from the available means of transport?
Well, the population issue is a two-edged sword. The fact that the population is increasing in cities is a challenge. You have to accommodate it. But just imagine if the population was going down. Okay, if it's going down, you don't have the economic ability to make any changes. So you live with what you've got, and in fact, you start to have to decline all the services. So you would be cutting back the public transport. You would not be building anything more at all. Population decline is not what you want. So what you have to see is that population increase is an opportunity. The growth of your city is something to accept as a chance to build a sustainable city. If you don't do that, it will overwhelm you, I understand. But if you do it, you will create a future that over the next 20 to 30 years of growth will build the future for your grandchildren.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Kleber. He would like to know how to approach sustainability in the transportation mode in remote areas, and how can, especially in semi-arid regions such as Brazilian Cerrado and Caatinga.
So we're shifting continents. Thank you, Kleber. The remote areas transport will need to shift in the same way that cities will. Cities will probably do this quicker and easier to start with at being electric. Electric transport will need to take over everywhere, and cities will do this first. It's likely to happen in the next decade that cars that you're driving now that are based on oil will continue, but there will not be new ones. The new ones that are all coming out in the 2020s are electric. Those electric vehicles can be recharged in various ways at homes and in the streets. And in remote and rural areas, there will be electric vehicles as well. But what do you do about tractors and trucks and so on? These will all need to be with biofuels. And biofuels are really being invented as much as anywhere in Brazil. Brazil is doing it very well. It is showing how you can create biofuels without having to get rid of food growing in those areas. I think there will be breakthroughs in technology that allow us to do it from cellulose rather than from glucose and sugars. But I do think that we'll have a lot more biofuels in these remote and regional areas. But don't expect to be using oil for cars and trucks and tractors into the future. That is the phasing out that is rapidly going to happen.
Thank you. Now, there's some of the questions which had been mailed to us. And then Ted would like to know, in the faster growing small and medium towns, public investment is focused more towards developing infrastructure for water supply, sewerage, even roads. But there is a huge neglect towards developing a comprehensive public transport system, which leads to a culture of owning private vehicles and turns out to be the bane of the city once it has grown to its capacity. And it also affects the viability of developing a public transport system later. What governance measures can be taken at early stages to welcome investments in public transport and also make it profitable for the local government so that they promote it?
That's the question of this whole MOOC, I would think. I think that. Sorry, which part of the world are you talking from?
He hasn't really mentioned his
Okay.
place of origin. I'm sorry.
What was his name?
Ted.
Ted. Okay, could be anywhere. Ted.
Yes.
The fast-growing cities of the world are the places of opportunity for change. And you are right that many of them are continuing the old way, which is to build around cars. Certainly you do need to improve water and waste systems and energy systems at the same time. But if you just build roads and don't think about public transport, then you will have a problem in the future. Why I showed that trackless tram is that there is new technology which is electric. It's public transport. It's a lot cheaper than having to do rail. So the fast-growing small cities have a difficult problem with putting in big capital projects like rail systems. These are not so expensive. So there are ways of looking at that I have a great hope will enable us to work on other options. So it's important. Governance has carrots and they have sticks. Make sure that you think about the carrots like having options for building public transport into the city, so that people choose that because it's faster, it's more convenient, it's more attractive, and if you don't do that, then you have to use sticks to try and force them to use public transport, which is usually second rate. The reality is those cities around the world that are enabling better public transport and doing less for roads. In fact, there are 22 cities now taking freeways out. That is the new era that's emerging. Big roads are not working. They are causing the problems we are trying to solve.
Okay, thanks. The next question is from Sophia. She's from New Zealand. She says, New Zealand relies heavily on road transport for freight and people. How will freight be transported sustainably in 10 years' time? Will investment for freight be a catalyst for infrastructure investment?
Yes, I've worked quite a bit in New Zealand, Christchurch and Auckland and Wellington, actually. The opportunities for change are there. I'm getting a lot of feedback, Gargi. Is that fixable? Yeah, thank you. That's better. The freight system is generally not a catalyst for the other things to be fixed. You have to do these things separately. The public transport systems, the electric train systems that you are now building in Auckland, desperately needed in Christchurch. You've got them in Wellington. These need to be expanded rapidly. I think you can do it better with the trackless tram. It is a lot cheaper. But those big, fast systems down corridors, heavy rail is still needed. And those systems are needed as the basic core of the future of any cities. You will not put freight on them. The trucks are going to have to become electric in cities, and that's now happening. Tesla's got an electric truck on the market. Or biofuels. You can do biofuels in New Zealand. There's plenty of opportunities for that. And I think that the freight systems will increasingly have to accelerate as well. But the thing we can do, and which are quite economically feasible for the people side of transport at this stage, as being the driver for change.
David would like to know, how important is the process of co-construction of knowledge for building an efficient public transportation system?
Co-construction of knowledge. Geez, I work in the UN system, and there are all these terms that I wish we could do without. But this is co-construction means we talk to each other, right? And we set up partnerships. In my language, that's all it is. And that's the way cities work. That's the way nations work. That's the way companies work. That's the way universities work. That's the way communities work. That's the way it's been for 10,000 years in our cities, and it will continue to be the way. I don't think that we need a co-construction policy. It's just good common sense. Sit down and start talking to people. It's what we talked about in the Indian film. Have a look at how we did that. It was a very straightforward process. You get people together in a room and you try to work out an approach to the future which you all agree on. And generally you can do it. It's not that hard, but you've got to start talking to people. If you don't talk, you don't co-construct, co-design, create co-benefits, all of those words. It's not that hard. Just start talking.
Yes, I think what he was coming from the side of being a stakeholder and not the deciding body. So that's what he wanted to, he's like, when is someone going to come and ask me or ask my community as to what is the best mode of transport that would be easy for you, and what's the most viable thing that works for you?
But, okay, well, let me answer that, because I thought you were coming from the top down, which is a very top down term, co-construction. Look, I think you don't wait for someone to come and ask you. You get out there and do it. I've spent my life working as an activist, creating futures for my city and other cities by getting 10 or 12 people together that put together a vision for what a change should be, and then getting huge media support, business support, various communities, and eventually the politicians have to act. So you don't wait, you just get out and start that whole process. But you cannot do it by yourself. You have to get a group together. A sustainable transport coalition anywhere can set a vision for change and start doing it. You have to have a vision, and then you start bringing people with you. It is not that hard, but it does take time and effort. You cannot do it without that kind of energy. But don't wait. Start.
I think that is the key takeaway from this question. The next question that we have is from India. Deepak says, even though I have to sit in my car longer when I drive to work, I prefer that to availing public transport, because at least driving is seamless. The lack of integration is a huge deterrent for me and my peers who are eager to avail public transport but are turned off by the incoherence. Is there any example of such a seamless multimodal integration in any city or country which India can seek inspiration from?
Well, there's examples in every country and most cities where that kind of seamless integration happens. And it is quite possible to do if you seek it out. In India, what you've got are the auto rickshaws, which are the last mile, first mile connection. Very seamless, easy link to a good public transport system. If you can't walk to a train or a fast bus option, you take the auto rickshaw. Now, they are increasingly going to be electric, as they've become CNG in most Indian cities. They're a lot cleaner. But that kind of demand responsive transport is what the West is saying now they have to develop, with autonomous vehicles and all kinds of robotic vehicles. That the simple, even the Uber pool is for that. It's about creating that seamless connection. But you've got it. It's there. You just have to actually put your keys down when you're in your house and say, I'll give it a try. Go out and do it and see how you can improve it so that it works for you. But it's not a matter of saying the technology's not there. You've got it there. Now, if it's not working well in your area, start a group that will make sure it does, that enables the auto rickshaws to have plenty of access to the train station. If you haven't got a train, you've got to get one. These things can be built. That's the kind of process that you need to start. But I do think it's important to actually try and see how well it works when you integrate it yourself and encourage other people to show how you can do it. And the mobile phone, of course, enables you to know exactly timetables, and you can even book a taxi if you need to through the mobile phone. That enables you to link in. So the seamless integration is done with the mobile phone as much as anything. But you've got the amazing thing of the auto rickshaw outside your front door.
Yes. The next question comes from Saiful in Bangladesh. He says, I've been reading about the concept of smart cards to successfully integrate multiple modes of transport, but I feel it's targeted towards a particular type of commuter who have access to bank accounts, but is sadly excluding a large section of the population who transact mostly in cash and are part of a much more informal economy. And they also happen to be one of the largest segment of commuters in the public transport because they're the non-affluent kind. How is a move like this going to make transport a sustainable initiative?
Yeah, look, there's a couple of things in there. First of all, the assumption that public transport is just for the poorer people is rapidly changing. Certainly in developed countries, white-collar workers are choosing public transport because it goes to centres where the knowledge economy is developing. So increasingly, the drive for public transport is coming from the wealthy and particularly the young wealthy. And they use smart cards. Sure, smart cards are an easy way to get public transport to work. But smart cards are generally in these systems free. You don't need to have a credit card to make it work. A smart card is just a bit of plastic, and it's something that you use to integrate across bus, train, and even auto rickshaw type transport could be brought into this. But I agree with you that those systems generally have been worked out for the wealthier side of public transport. They work very well, by the way. I don't think anyone goes back after they've developed a smart card system. It's so easy to use. My smart card is it's called a Smart Rider, and it takes a certain amount of money from my bank whenever it starts running out. I never have to top it up. It's just constantly there. I flash it as I get onto a bus or a train or a ferry. It's totally integrating, and it will expand. It will expand to use the last mile, first mile connections. It could easily be fed into autonomous vehicles that are demand responsive. But in the meantime, that's a transition that I think you'll find will happen. But in the meantime, cash is still important. It is important in every public transport system. They still enable that. You can use it. And it is purely a question of how cheap it is to enable poorer people to continue to use it. What we're finding is that that smart cards can generally, because they save money for the system, because it saves time, that they are becoming providing fares cheaper. So you need programs that can encourage people who are of lower means to have access to a smart card, to provide them with a smart card and to enable it to be topped up in various easy ways. There are smart cards that are used for power in remote villages where you use the card to turn on the electricity. If you're running out of money, then you can top it up in a central village location. So smart cards are becoming part of the world, not just for the wealthy. They are possible to enable welfare to be provided better and easier.
The next question we have is from Brazil. Marco would like to ask that he says that studies in Brazil have shown that women work for more than 5 hours per week, which is unpaid. And also they do a lot more frequent but non-design trips in for household related activities. Whereas the men tend to make more linear trips, which have very fixed origins and destinations, normally home to work and vice versa. Plus, since the women lack a steady income, they are denied the opportunity of owning a car and rely purely on public transport and cycling infrastructure. But studies showed that women have difficulty accessing public transit and do not cycle much at all. But how do we encourage and facilitate a female biking culture in these developing countries?
Well, that's a really good question. And Marco, I think that you're onto a very good topic there that would make a great PhD and certainly a great program if you can find a good solution. The reason that women live longer than men is not just because they're biologically more fitted to a whole range of things, but they do walk more, and health is dependent on how much we walk. So the men getting into their cars and going off, that might be seen to be better by some, but it's not. In fact, women who walk are becoming more healthy or staying more healthy, and you don't want to particularly stop that. You want the men to get out of their cars and do more walking. Flexible transport, however, and biking is what you're trying to get to. And there are parts of the world where biking has been rediscovered and rebuilt. When you go to a place like Copenhagen or Amsterdam, you think, oh, they've always done this, that they have more people using a bike now to go to work in Copenhagen than by car. But 20, 30 years ago, it was dominated by cars. Biking had almost disappeared. So they rediscovered it. The reality is there are ways of doing it. And they did it in Copenhagen subtly, as well as by getting demonstrations of how to do it, like the King and Queen riding a bike everywhere. And mayors of cities were re-elected on the basis that they helped to make biking better. So there are now whole roads that are set aside just for biking, but lots of infrastructure was built, very much cheaper, of course. Parking was phased out, 3%, 2 to 3% per year parking in city areas was removed and replaced with walking and cycling facilities. And they did that year after year. So you didn't notice a great change, but you go to those cities now and they're so much harder for people to get around by car. You just jump on the bike, it's easier. And that's a transition. So there's no dramatic way. You can't just sort of pass a law and say, no more driving, especially men. It's just not going to work. You have to do it in subtle, difficult ways, usually with politicians. In Latin America, certainly Peñalosa has done it in Bogota. It's possible to make changes in that direction, but they're all hard.
Thank you. The next question is from David, who's from Mexico City. And I think he would like to take you up on your experience in the public office. He would like to know, how do you talk about a difficult concept like building resilience with a politician or an office holder? And how do you engage them when you want to talk about resilience? This is also a bottom-up question. I think here is someone who just wants to know how to start, how to go about it.
Yeah, look, in my 20s, I started getting involved in local politics and going along to meetings, and then suddenly the local, the state government closed down our rail system, and I ran the campaign to save that railway. Now, I was in my 20s. I didn't have any experience at doing this, and I knew very little about it. That's where I started, which is to learn about sustainable transport. I knew it was wrong. And I've now written books about resilient cities and all that, but and those books are designed to help people like you and like me that I was then in my 20s, who needed to learn how to do it. We provide the data on why it's better, the economics, the environmental basis. But in each city, it's different as to how you go about that. The key thing is to develop a hopeful vision of what it can be. And you start putting that together and talking to other people, and then talk to politicians. If you've got a group where you've got 10 people, that's enough, 10 people. I've always thought 10 was the optimum size. You don't need 10,000. You just need 10 people to get a group together, and those 10 people have a vision. Then you go and see the politician and say, look, we've got something for you that you can ride into your next election on the basis of saying you want a sustainable transport revolution in this area. And you're going to help biking, you're going to help walking, you're going to get better public transport, and you're going to make it easier for the general population to save money as well as saving the planet. Now, all of that can be put together quite simply, and you start locally and you show what you can do as a group, and then you will find that the world starts to open up for you with opportunities for doing more and more of that. Good luck. It's a great journey to go on. Believe me, I have really enjoyed it. It's really something you've got to thrive on. It's not like you're going to just work. It is, in fact, life. It's life-giving for a city, but it's life-giving for yourself because you're contributing. You're showing your children and your grandchildren eventually, which I've now got, that you can change things. You can.
Well, I hope that sends the message to David, because I think he's really trying out there to make a difference and just want some guidance on that. The next question that I have is from Calcutta and in India. And Jenny says that there is a newly planned city right, in the neighborhood in Calcutta, which is called the New Town. And a problem that she's seen there is while they have created the road and infrastructure building, and then the LIG buildings have been allotted in the latter phases, which are farther and farther away from the mother city. And the public transport system has only been given access till the first or the second phase of this newly planned city. Now, what happens is the allottees to these LIG buildings, even though they may have been moved to better housing conditions, they suffer a lot from the lack of a sustainable, cheap public transport system. And thus, a lot of them have chosen not to move into their new housings. So, how can the local government and the service provider be incentivized to work together and make the planned city successful? She also adds that she had inquired with a few private service providers, and they cited the lack of profit as the reason for not extending their services to these areas.
Very good. Jenny, you have a problem because the history of new towns is not very good. They've all failed. Their whole point to big, brassy, dense cities is to try and regenerate them rather than saying, oh, they're so difficult, let's make a new city and we'll get it all right out there somewhere. So you go out and you get a really good architect and you have a lovely new city out in the rural areas, a long way from the main city. And they all fail because of this very issue you've raised. It's too far to go to get anywhere from there to where the work is, where the hospitals are, where the education facilities are, which are all part of the old city. The new city is nice and clean and neat, but there's nothing there apart from houses and the odd shopping centre and things like that. So that's the fundamental problem we've had with this, what we call modernist planning. It doesn't work. You have to rebuild and regenerate the old city. So what can you do now for that other city out there that's struggling because it costs so much to get anywhere? It is a problem around the world that we've failed in this new town kind of movement. But the only thing you can do for those places is to try to make a city that is more dense, that is more mixed. It's more like the old city. You cannot make a city that is nice and neat and low density and so on and expect all the services and all of the opportunities of the old city. You've got to go for density and mixed use, and then the economics of it will begin to work. But that's not what the textbooks tell you. The textbooks are saying, oh, make it low density and zoned so that you don't have mixed use. But that won't work for transport. Transport will become so difficult, and you'll be all dependent on cars, and the poor will suffer. The poor will pay a lot of money to get anywhere. So, of course, they'll stay in the old city. That's where the opportunities are. That's where the big chances are for your children to grow and get education and develop a future. I do think the new town movement is a failure. You need to get over it and get on much more into the regeneration of the old city. And don't do it with big overpasses like the one that collapsed in Calcutta. That was a terrible accident, but it was a terrible idea to take that beautiful old walking city area and put a great big overpass through it. No wonder it collapsed. It was the wrong place for it.
So, I mean, just to follow up on that, when, like you said, building a new town is not probably the best option, but and a denser city is the more sustainable way to go about it. Will a denser city not sort of compromise on the right of way that we are looking at? We have to look at some generous right of ways to accommodate the various mass rapid transit systems, or cars, or even any other public transport.
Yeah, but the good thing about mass transit is that you can carry 50 times as many people on the same space as a road. So the roads are what are appalling to put through the middle of old cities. If you need a good mass transit system, you can go above or underground. And that's what the metros are mostly doing. And they're carrying massive numbers of people. The metros in Chinese cities were mostly underground. In some places, they go above ground on stilts. You can put them through very narrow spaces, and they are carrying the equivalent of 10, 20 lanes of traffic. So it is so much more competitive and economic to do that. But the road lobby is very powerful. They talk about trucks as being the important thing to build it for, but also they're essentially wanting to get it better for cars, and that's a trade-off. If you're going to do that, you're going to ruin the old city, and that's what Calcutta did in that particular area, and it wasn't appropriate. I don't think that cities in the future are going to do more of that. There will be less and less building big roads and a lot more on the public transport. But let me go back to that trackless tram. You can carry 20 times of what one lane of traffic will do with a trackless tram. So one lane, that's all you need, and you can carry 20 times what the car traffic is doing. That trackless tram can be put into any city, anywhere, very quickly. You don't have to spend a lot of money going underground or above ground. But the big, heavy train systems can sometimes be necessary, and you do have to spend the money then. But this is a lot cheaper, and I think everybody ought to seriously look at it.
Thank you. The next question is from Hiru. He's also not mentioned his location, but he's like, countries like Sweden and Canada are heavily promoting electronic vehicles as a part of their transport movement. But how sustainable is lithium battery dependency in the long term for the future? I mean, eventually it's also another extraction-based dependency on for a particular type of, if not fuel, but yes, a sort of fuel.
Okay, good question, and especially for a West Australian. Most of the world's lithium is coming from Western Australia. We have 8 mines for lithium, and they are now producing more than anywhere else in the world. The lithium is a crustal element. It is part of the Earth's crust. It is not rare. It is not like a rare earth. It's everywhere basically, but there are some parts of the world, like in Western Australia, where we produce it very cheaply. So I don't think it'll run out. We've probably got lithium-ion batteries for the next 30 to 40 years as being the cheapest option. They're in our mobile phones, they're in our computers, they're now going to be in our cars, and the lithium production is ramping up. There was an oil-based myth that said lithium was going to be only available in the Bolivia and those places that had salt lakes where you could extract it. There is some lithium coming from those places, but there's no way there's going to be an OPEC on lithium, and that it's not going to run out. You can recycle it very simply. We're hoping to set up a lithium recycling facility here. It's not difficult chemistry-wise, and it is safe. It is not a toxic material. You can hold lithium carbonate in your hand. It is not unsafe. And the new batteries are very clever at producing electricity very cheaply in a very light way. So the breakthrough is there. We have arrived at the holy grail of electric transport technology with the lithium-ion battery. It is what we've been wanting to get for 30 or 40 years, and it's there. It's now cheap, and the electric vehicle manufacturers are all rapidly moving this way. So the 2020s will see cheap cars that are electric with lithium-ion batteries, and the production of them will be the new economy. And the new economy will also be recycling those batteries and all e-waste to ensure that they are fully recycled back into the system. That it is not difficult to do. It just has to be regulated and created so that we can do it. And we've got a new program here called Lithium Valley. We're trying to make Lithium Valley to like Silicon Valley. It's the new economy. The new green economy is going to be based on everything being electric, and lithium-ion batteries will be so significant to that. So don't avoid it. Go with it. It's going to get rid of coal and oil. This is the breakthrough we needed. And there is no conspiracy about it. It's a much more transparent and open process that can enable these batteries to be used, and it's really only being stopped by the big coal and oil lobbies who can see their end coming. And I welcome it because we've had enough of coal and oil. Their time is over.
Here's to more peaceful green times. The next question comes from Damien. With the whole onslaught of smart cities around the world, ICT has been heralded as the next big thing in traffic and transportation management. But to what extent is analytics-guided action the solution? And what is its feasibility in the short and the middle term, where the first changes are the battle with the change management of the commuters or the drivers in a city?
Yeah, look, smart cities needs redefining as smart and sustainable cities. Smart cities can be very dumb if they are just lots of electronics and IT and sensors everywhere, but they're all still based on cars and even fossil fuels. This is not smart. But all the smart companies around the world that are trying to show that they're the ones that you should be using are clearly not going to work unless they're sustainable. So it has to be a process of change where you direct the smarts into sustainable transport, sustainable buildings, sustainable corridors, sustainable factories, sustainable industries. All of that is the necessary part of the future, but the smarts enables us. There's no doubt that we can use all of this new technology, but autonomous vehicles roaming around looking for people is still going to be an awful city covered with cars that completely ruins the pedestrian qualities of a city. We have to be very careful about how we allow smarts to take over just because some company says it's smart. And the reality is the vehicle industries of the world are trying desperately to get more cars out there because they're smart. Well, it's not smart. We just need to be smart ourselves and use it to direct the future of our cities into being more sustainable, more pedestrian-oriented, more public transport-oriented, more solar-oriented, more electric, and creating this next economy that is more green and more able to provide for people and the planet.
Thank you. I think the last question of the day is again from David from Mexico. And he wants to know that what you're talking about, this entire green supply chain, movement in transportation, how important is artificial intelligence and automation in this whole process? And what would be the main topics of focus or the priorities for approaching a green supply chain?
Oh dear, these are really good questions, and ones that I'm working on myself with this Lithium Valley concept. Every place needs to go through this process of thinking about it. How you can use new technologies to help us create this green economy. The reality is there is very good robotic and much more automatic systems that can be used for processing the lithium and the other battery metals, doing the electrochemistry that can create the new clever kind of batteries, producing the batteries. They're very much more less labor intensive. It doesn't mean that you don't have people involved in the process, but there are ways of doing this very much more cheaply, and therefore making it available for the city and the region. And you'll find that there are many, many more knowledge economy jobs associated with that, and clever tradesman type jobs that go with it. But the low cost labor approach to this green economy is not going to work, because the automatic, autonomous, smart systems will replace it, and that's phasing in many parts of the world. It's the same with the e-waste processes. You can do e-waste by getting people to pick out the little bits personally, and you'll pay them very little and you'll get a very poor result. But there are very clever ways of extracting those metals and recycling them. Those clever ways, I think, are going to win. So think about the supply chain processes in terms of these new robotic systems. They are so much cheaper, and that if you want to introduce green economy anywhere in the world, you're going to have to be very smart about it, as well as getting local materials to feed into that system. So I'm sure Mexico's got a lot of the various components of that, but start thinking about how that could work together, and then promoting it within the governance system, because setting standards, setting goals for electric vehicles, electric everything, setting ways in which batteries can be made there. This is the process that you're going to have to go into now. It's an exciting new world, but it does need new thinking, and you've begun that thinking. So I congratulate you on that. Don't give up on that. That's where the future is.
Thank you, Peter. I think that's a very good note on which we have to end our webinar today, since we are out of time. So thank you, everybody, for being a part of this, and thank you for the really insightful and interesting questions. I hope we could answer all of them. If you have any further questions, please post them on the discussion forum of the platform, or you can mail them to us at cities@sdgacademy.org. Peter, thank you so much for taking our time to do this. And I think we have some great reviews, and people are really thankful for, I think, more of the inspiration that we have to get off our seats and do something about this. And here's hoping for a better world.
Thank you, Gagi. And thank you, everybody.
So much.
Love the questions. Bye.
Bye.